allow me to introduce Horia Soltani. She's a legal professional, a lawyer based out of Toronto. Her expertise is in the privacy universe, which is really important. And this is going to be really integral to any new businesses that are starting up and now going online and virtual because you're gathering data. And that's what she does. She practices or works on privacy and data collection concerns. She understands the complexity and the reward of starting a new business and managing its growth. And that's part of managing the growth. And she's also working with, she's part of a Goodlawyer, goodlawyer.com. And she practices her own law firm, HTS Law. And I'm going to stop there because the rest of the thunder comes to you, my dear. Go ahead.
Thanks, Bernie. So I just put in my LinkedIn as well in the chat if anybody would like to connect. I will now share my screen so we can start the presentation. Okay. So can everybody see my screen? Okay, perfect. So today we're going to be talking about legal considerations as you grow your business. Today's agenda is going to entail a little introduction and ground rules, but we already discussed that. Then we're going to talk about business structure, employees, then intellectual property, contracts we should be aware of and mindful, compliance requirements, and some marketing. And hopefully at the end, we'll have some time to ask and discuss some questions. So the ground rule here is that a disclaimer, this is not legal advice. Please do not rely on this as legal advice. This is just for information purposes to give you a sort of an understanding, some foundation, and then to take this information and look at what your needs are and then go get specific legal advice for it. So the introduction was done. Thank you, Bernie. But just to also add is that I'm also a certified privacy professional. I have my CIPP, and alongside with advising businesses, I also help individuals that have data concerns and privacy concerns. And as well as an entrepreneur myself, I understand the complexity yet rewarding process of starting a business, and it entails many things. And hopefully, in this sort of webinar, we touch upon all of them. So we do have a very short amount of time, so it's going to be, high level view and information. And the first thing that, we need to discuss is the business structure of your business. So you need to see, check to see what kind of structure you're in. Is it meeting your needs? Do you need to maybe change your structure as you're growing? And what kind of structure is going to meet those needs? So, we have the sole proprietorship, which is where you as an individual own the business. You're not separate from it as a legal entity. All assets, liabilities is incurred on you, and you are carrying the business under your name. Or if you want to, carry the business under a different name, you would just have to register that business name. It's a very easy process to set up. It's cost-wise is much less in comparison to an incorporation. But with that comes unlimited personal liabilities. So your personal savings, loans, all of that, it can be sort of, it's out in the open if there's ever any issues with your business. Now, aside from a sole proprietorship, we have a general partnership. Now, a general partnership is similar to a sole proprietorship, that it's easy to set up. It doesn't have a lot of required paperwork. You don't have to register with the government unless the name that you want to operate in is different than the name of yourself and your partner. So what is required in a partnership, though, is a partnership agreement that sets out what are the duties of partners, what are their liabilities, how much you're bringing in, what is this whole partnership all about? So a partnership agreement or a partnership can be established through an oral agreement or written, but I always recommend that you have a partnership agreement written out because you want to make sure that the foundation of your business is there and you have everything you need to be protected, because if in case that partnership sort of goes down a bad hill, you want to make sure that there is a contract you can turn to mitigate the consequences or the issues that may arise. And in that partnership agreement, you also sort of spell out if there's ever an issue, how do you go about determining or making a decision, or if a legal issue comes up, are you going to go to arbitration only, or are you going to have mediation and then go to courts? So a partnership agreement is very important for that. There's also another section to partnership, and it's a limited partnership. And the primary difference between that and a general partnership is that there is two different classes of partners. You have a limited partner and a general partner, and one of each has to exist in this sort of structure. And a limited partner means that your liability is limited to the amount that you put in to the partnership, but a general partner has sort of unlimited liability. And within a limited partnership, there is only one partner that has the sort of daily um, management of the partnership. The limited partner does not. So it gets a little tricky there, but that's also structure to be mindful of. And then there's also a joint venture. It's not a business structure. It can sort of fall under, you can have a joint venture partnership or a joint venture corporation or a joint venture contract. And what a joint venture is where, parties come and contribute money, property, effort, knowledge, skills, or other assets to a single and common undertaking for a limited period of time. And you see this usually for obtaining property or starting off a business, right? So it has a flexibility because it allows the joint ventures to come together to pool their assets and knowledge for a commercial benefit, but at the same time allows them to keep separate their legal ownership and liabilities, right? But there is sort of issues with it with liability, and also you can be exposed for the liability for the acts of your other co-founders. So that's something to also keep in mind that can be helpful in you expanding your business. Now, incorporation is sort of the unlimited, sort of the end business structure that we're going to touch upon, and you can incorporate, federally and provincially. When you incorporate federally, you do need to have provincial headquarters, so you would pick then where you want to be. The benefits of an incorporation is that it's a separate legal entity from its owners, so it's owned by the shareholders, but the liability of the company is separate. It's considered a natural person, that company. So, under legislation, it has the power, rights, and privileges of a natural person, meaning that you can own property or you can incur liabilities, right? So, and one other benefit of it is that its existence can continue no matter what happens to one of the shareholders. Now, with a sole proprietorship or a partnership, if one of the partners passes away or you pass away, then that business comes to an end, but not with an incorporation. So it can carry on no matter what happens. Now, one of the con or elements that you have to consider about incorporation is that it is costly in comparison to a sole proprietorship or a partnership, because you have to incorporate with the government. You have to have your articles of incorporation, your bylaws. There's going to be, share certificates may be issued. You need to maybe have a shareholder agreement. So just from the beginning, you're going to incur a lot of costs. Unlike a sole proprietorship where there isn't any, legal documents that you need to establish from the beginning, unless you want to operate a business name that's different than yours. So there is that element that you need to consider. You also need to sort of file your own separate, the company's separate tax returns, and its losses and gains are included in that. And you need to also maintain the legal documents of the company. So you have annual reports that you have to do, and every time that there is a new director coming in or shareholder coming in, you got to change up your documents, right? A corporation has many books that includes all of that, where a sole proprietorship or a partnership does not. But it does also have its benefits, right? It has that um, the tax advantage they can use. So, in the beginning, depending on the type of business you have and your costs, maybe a sole proprietorship is a way to go because you're not making a lot of money. And then as you grow, then you want to maybe incorporate because then you're making more than what you maybe need in a year. So you want to hold that money in the company so you don't have to take it out and pay taxes for it. So um, to also make a determination on which sort of structure is good for you and when to incorporate, you should also consider speaking with your accountant, and they can help you sort of come to an understanding on when it's a good time for you to take that jump. So what you should also look at within your business structure is the share ownership structure you have. So see if you need to establish or update any agreements that you have. If you are already in sort of incorporated company and you're looking to expand, you may want to bring in new share owners or um, directors to the company. And if that's the case, then you may need to update your agreement to include them in the share agreement. And you have to break down on what is the responsibilities and duties of each shareholder, how are shares going to be transferred, who is going to have IP ownership, how is money going to be borrowed for the business, how are decisions and management of the company going to take place on a daily basis. So you need to, as you're growing, examine your legal documents and make the changes where necessary. So if somebody's coming in as they want to become a share owner of your company, I always advise that you shouldn't just accept it and not have any agreement in place. You should always break down on what the parameters of it are. And then also as you're going, you should also consider, M&As, right? Which is when two or more companies combine to form a new company, or you acquire another company or the assets of the business by another person. So you may want to be acquired, or you may want to acquire another business, right? Depending on your needs, and merge and maybe develop together. And this is going to push your growth or expand your resources. So always be open to that. That's a whole different beats on its own, requires a different sort of workshop on it that breaks it down, but it's something to be mindful of as you're growing. So that said, the next element that you should consider as you're growing your business is employees, right? You should look at to see what are your hiring needs and establish the type of employment you need. Do you need a full-time employee or do you need a contractor? And there's a big difference between those two, and you want to make sure that you have the required legal documents for either of them. So a contractor is different than an employee because you are just contracting with them on short-term basis for a specific need. So there's the level of control you have over them is limited in comparison to an employee. The ownership of the tools of the contractor is on their own. You don't own the tools and you don't give them the tools. The subcontractor or the contractor can subcontract. There is no limitation to it. Obviously, this can be negotiated per contract, but that's an element to consider. And the type of work that they do or they take on is important and sets sort of the framework of what is independent contractor. Now, an employee, when you have a full-time employee, you're subject to the Employment Standards Act, and you will have to sort of obviously pay them a salary, establish that salary, the hours they have to work, but also you have to, contribute to their EI. And the manner you terminate their contract is different, right? You have to be mindful of the common law and the legislation and the requirements you have under both of them when you're dealing with an employee, right? Aside from the contract you have with the employee, you need to also make sure that you are up to date with the requirements under the Employment Standards Act or common law. So that's case law that has, been determined depending on different employment matters. So you have to look and see currently within your business structure, within the means you have, what can you take on? One thing with contractors you should consider is that, and again, you should have an independent contractor agreement and an employee agreement that sets all of the framework of what each is to do, their responsibilities, their tasks, the time frame. But with an independent contractor, the amount of control you have over them is much limited in comparison to an employee. And you have to be very careful that you keep that distinction, because if it gets a little bit messy, then you can be in a risk, because then that contractor will consider themselves an employee, or they may be seen like an employee from the outside, and then you would have to give them the benefits of an employee, which also includes sick leave and vacation. And also something to consider is the gig economy, where it's a gray area right now, but it would fall mostly under independent contractor, but you also have to be very careful. The law hasn't been fully established under that. So once you have determined whether you want to have an independent contractor or hire independent contractor or a full-time employee, then you have to consider, the tools that the employee will need, or you will need, to be able to, establish a good employment relationship. And one of them is employment policies. So don't neglect this. This is very important. This sort of sets out what is the duties of that employee, what they can do and not do in the company, sort of their interactions with the company property. If you're going to be providing them access to your client list, or to your networks, if you're giving them computers or cell phones to work with, there needs to be an outline on what is a procedure for them using these tools, or getting access to these documents or services. And if there's ever sort of a concern, who do they bring it up with? This policy outlines harassment, sort of the harassment policy of the company, which we'll discuss a bit further down. And it also sets out their duties as well in greater detail. So these employment policies, or sometimes they're called code of conduct, they are provided at the same time that the employment offer is provided. So it's important, because when the potential employee gets the offer, they look at the offer, but then they have to look at the code of conduct to see what is expected of them in the company. And from there, they make the decision. If you don't have an employment policy, but you already have an employee, it's okay. You can now establish a employment policy and bring it into your workforce, but always be mindful that the employment policies and code of conduct have to be given to the potential employee when the offer of employment is given to them, and they need to sign it to show that they have read it and acknowledged, and they know what their responsibilities are. So that said, now we get to intellectual property. Now, as you're growing your business, you need to also consider how you can protect your business, or protect your idea or the product that you have established or in the process of establishing. And there are, there's three types of intellectual property that are, thrown around and discussed a lot. to add on to that, we also have industrial design, which is an intellectual property, is very specific. And we also have trade secrets. Those are not intellectual property. Trade secrets you cannot protect legally through legal documents that you submit to the government, but there's ways that you can protect your trade secrets in your company, and we'll touch upon that later. So the three sort of intellectual properties that you should consider is one trademarks, and trademarks are used to protect a product, phrase, a word, a symbol that is associated with the product or service you're providing. So, famous examples of these include the Nike swoosh sign or the McDonald's M. So think of trademarks as a way to protect your brand and the service you are providing. You can even trademark your business name. So when you register your business or trade name your business, that's completely different than a trademark, right? Trademark gives it full protection in all of Canada and internationally. And then we have copyright. So copyright is used to protect an original work of authorship. It's a work that you have done. It can be an article, it can be a book, it can be a poem, it can be a sort of statement or an article you posted on your website. And the importance of copyright protection is that once you register your right, it's yours. In essence, whatever you produce, it is your right. But here you are putting it down in law and you are registering that right. And if anybody uses it without your permission, you have a right to file a lawsuit. So it's easier to track the ownership back to you. And then the last one is patents. So patents are used when you want to protect an invention or discovery that's new or non-obvious or useful. Now, patents might not be an intellectual property that fits all types of businesses. You have to have a service or a product that is novel and new that you're creating, or one that is significantly updating our existing patent. But trademark and copyright are two IPs that you should consider as you're going, because these are sort of the ways you can protect your brands and expand your brands. With patents, they're very time sensitive and it's a very costly and long process. But with trademark and copyright, is less tricky than patent. And cost-wise is also less. So for trademark, you can register a trademark yourself, or you can get a trademark agent to do it for you. Now, the difference here is that it has to be a trademark agent. So the Intellectual Property Office of Canada will only deal with agents or deal with individuals that have that are agents that have passed the test and become a certified trademark agent. So you can submit a trademark yourself. You can go online, create an account, and then put down your company logo or your name, go through the process to trademark your phrase or symbol, your business symbol, and then you're good to go. Or you can hire a trademark agent. So, not every lawyer can do that. So what's important is just to remember to make sure that it's an agent, because then you can't interact with the intellectual property. I mentioned, so those are the main intellectual properties to consider. But you should also something you should also consider is trade secrets. Now, these are not protected by an official registration, so you don't put in an application. So a trade secret is something that is private and important to your business's success and its competitive edge in the market. So the way you can protect trade secrets is through non-disclosure agreements, or you can use and you use them with other documents as well and other strategies to ensure that the secret is not leaked outside of your company. So one well-known trade secret is the formula for Coca-Cola. So you can't really patent that formula. You can't copyright it. You can't trademark it, but it is a trade secret. And the way you protect it is sort of through the documents you implement, like the non-disclosure agreement and other legal documents within your company. Okay. So as we were discussing sort of non-disclosure agreements, this leads us to the discussion on contracts. So you need to look at and establish the contract that address your business needs. Contracts help protect yourself from legal liabilities. I know sometimes it can be overwhelming or sometimes you don't want to deal with the paperwork, but the contracts are very important to mitigate your risk and also to establish your business. There is a variety of different types of contracts. So just to give an example, there is a service contract. So this type of contract discusses what type of service you are providing and the terms of that service. It gives a breakdown of the price. It explains what the rights of the service provider and the customers are. So different types of service contracts exist. One is, for example, you are creating a website for a customer that can fall under a service contract, or you are providing a service by working to hire employees for them. That can be considered a service contract. Then there's a supply contract. And this sort of contract sets out the terms and conditions of the goods that you are manufacturing and supplying. So it sets the standards of the goods. It talks about how orders are to be put in place and how they are handled. It discusses shipments of goods. So let's say if you are, you have a company that you're selling coffee, for example, you may require a supply contract where you might be hiring a manufacturer who's going to be creating and supplying you these paper bags for your coffee, or they're going to be supplying you the coffee. So this is an important contract to have because you want to spell out everything, the requirements of the product, how the products are going to be, the quality is going to be measured, what happens if they don't meet the quality, what happens if the product gets stuck at the border, who pays for that, what kind of insurance you need, and so forth. Then you have confidentiality and non-disclosure, which is crucial, along with non-compete and non-solicitation. So no matter what type of business you have, you should have these. Now, they can be a standalone agreement, or they can be part of established agreement. It can be clauses that are put in your service agreement, your supply agreement, your employment agreement, and so forth. Now, confidentiality and non-disclosure, the essence of it is that the individual who is getting the private information or the classified information that you're giving them, they're bound to hold on to that information and not tell anybody else. Or if they are to tell anybody else, like their employees, for required reasons, then it has to be spelled out in that agreement. Non-compete, non-solicitation, what it's all about is that with non-compete, it means that that individual can't leave your, I guess, your employment, for example, and go and compete with compete with your business by going to a business that is working within the same field as you, and they go and pick a position that was similar to the position that they had within your business, right? So you don't want them to go take your take the skills they learned or the knowledge they have of your business and go and use that to the advantage of a different company, but within the same business service. And non-solicitation, what it means is that, or the essence of it is that the individual can't come and try to poke and pick your employees and your, even maybe your vendors, and try to bring them on their side and sort of make you lose your edge with them, or make you lose the skillful employees you have in your company. So one thing to consider about non-compete and non-solicitation, and it goes back to the type of employee you have, is that with a contractor, it's going to be very hard to have a non-compete clause or agreement with them, because the whole essence of a contractor is that you are not restricting their work. They can be hired by others that do similar work because they're a contractor, they're not an employee. So you have to be very mindful of that. Non-solicitation is something that you can include in a contract with an independent contractor. Now, with an employee, you do have usually the non-compete and the non-solicitation because you want to make sure that you're protected fully. And also when you are hiring employees down the road, if you're not at the moment, also check with them to make sure that they're not bound by any non-compete, non-solicitation, right? You don't want to be in a situation where later on a company comes after you thinking that you know, went after their employee or you took advantage of that and now you're competing with them and you have insider scoop about what their business is all about. So remember to check with the employee, the potential employee that you want to hire about this stuff. So compliance now. Two elements that I want us to discuss that sort of touches upon all areas of business, no matter which sector you are. And please keep in mind that there's more elements of compliance depending on which sector you are and what sort of service you're providing. But two important ones is privacy and security and health and human rights. So with privacy and security as a company, no matter your business size, or what type of business you operate in, you are subject to PIPEDA, which is the Personal Information Protection and Electronics Documents Act, which is the federal privacy law of Canada. Now, there is BC, Alberta, and Quebec that has their own provincial Privacy Act. Those you also need to be mindful of if you are operating in those jurisdictions. But let's say you're in Ontario, then the act that you would look at would be PIPEDA. So as a business, you should have an understanding of what type of data you are collecting, what you are doing with that data, and how you are securing that data. So data breaches and cyber attacks are on a rise, and especially with the sort of the remote environment that we're in right now. And no matter your business size, you can be hit and then you will have to pay the penalties. It doesn't matter if you are a developed business or a small or an upcoming business. And the thing with attackers is that they know that small businesses might not have the resources or may not take the time to consider the security elements they need to put in place. So they are an easy target. And when that happens, if you do get targeted and your data that you collect from your clients or your consumers is breached, you're going to be in a very sticky situation because then you may have lost the trust of your consumers. So it's very important that you take the time to consider what is the steps you need to take to make sure that the data you're collecting is secured. And to sort of create that structure, the first thing you got to do is look at, and with data, I mean like personal identifiable information. It can be your customers, their names, their email addresses, their driver's license, it might be their credit card information, their SIN number. So it's a variety of things. Now, on a scale of how sensitive they are, it's different. So you have to look at first, what are you collecting? Why are you collecting it? For what reason? And then from there, look at how sensitive they are and then take the required measurements in protecting that data. So for example, if you're going to, put it on the server, make sure that it's encrypted. Make sure you have a key. Or if you're collecting that data and then you're giving it to a different company to process it for you, you have to make sure that you have an agreement with that company on how they're going to process that data, what security and privacy elements are they going to be implementing to make sure that data is secured. And the whole transfer of that data is also very important to consider. So that is privacy and security. I'll touch upon that more as we go down, especially when we discuss websites. I'll give you sort of some breakdowns on what you can do to make sure that you are meeting your sort of obligations with PIPEDA and protecting your consumers' privacy. And then with health and human rights, so what's important here is that for you to ensure, there is no harassment in the workplace, be it in person or remotely, ensure the safety of your employees. So employers are bound by the health and safety legislation, which creates obligations for both the employer and the employee to minimize the risk of any workplace accidents. So as an employee, or as an employer, you have a general duty to take on all responsible precautions to protect the health and safety of your workers. And there are specific legal duties for certain industries as well, right? So if you go into mining, if you go into health sectors, there is, as there's specific requirements and compliance you have to meet for that. But in general, for your business, and if you're in Ontario, right? So you should make sure that you establish a health and safety policy, right? So under Ontario legislation, if you regularly employ 6 or more workers, you have to have a health and safety policy, a workplace of violence prevention policy, a workplace harassment prevention policy. And if you have 6 to 19 workers on a regular basis, then you will need to also have a health and safety representative. So an individual where your employers can go to for bringing up their concern or getting guidance about matters that they may have. So this is something that, from the beginning, as you are working towards hiring employees, you should consider these elements and create the policies for them so they can be sort of included in the employee policies or code of conduct when you give to the potential employer with their employment agreement. And it's something that should be available in the office. So if there's ever any issues, there's sort of a manual or step-by-step process of what needs to take place. So with that said, we get to marketing. So, one element of growing your business is marketing, and you want to sort of use as many resources as possible. Social media is one. We have Twitter, we have Instagram, Facebook, etc. So if you are in the process of growing your business, you have to first have an idea and plan on how you want to use these platforms. How are you going to utilize them for your growth? Now, this falls under sort of your business plan. It's not like a legal document per se, but you should have a business plan and you should consider how you're going to utilize these tools and grow your business. But as you are growing your business and you hire employees, you should also have a policy on what these employees can or cannot post on these social media websites. Or if there's ever a concern, how do you go about, or how does that employee go about figuring out how to resolve that issue? So if you want to partner with people on social media, if you want to comment on other people's posts, or if you want to make a post on social media, how do you go about it? So there needs to be a policy for that. There needs to be training for that as well, because all of this is a way to help your business grow and for you to keep the image that you want for your business and to continue that trust of your clients or potential clients in your business. Now, the second element to that is website. So website is very important. And the elements that are very important on your website is a privacy policy and terms of service. And then this goes back to the requirement or the compliance of privacy and security. So you need to have a privacy policy on your website. It's mandated by law. And what the privacy policy discusses is sort of it tells your customer or the individual who's reading that website and interacting with your website what type of information you are collecting from them, why you're collecting that information, why do you need that information, what are you going to do with that information, and after that use of that information has taken place, how are you going to destroy that information? So you need to break that down for the individual so they feel comfortable and they know what's going to happen when they sign up, for example, with your website, or if they go and buy that coffee off from your website. If you're working with a third party that's going to be doing the processing for you, so let's say Square, you're working with them, then you need to explain to them in your privacy policies what vendors you're working with, or which other companies is your data going, their data is going to. So with that privacy policy, you should also explain if they have a concern or question about sort of the data that's being collected or this whole process, who can they contact, right? Is it going to be a specific individual? Is there going to be a specific email address? All of that should be spelled out in a privacy policy. Along with a privacy policy, you need to have a terms of service. Now, a terms of service is sort of a distinct form of contract where it's a contract between your website, essentially you, and the user. So it sets out the rights and responsibility of the person using the site. So what is important about terms of service or terms of use, they're both, sometimes both words are used, but it means the same thing, is that it's a one-way contract. So you set the grounds for how that consumer or that individual is to interact with your website. And if they don't like it, well, they can interact with your website. Obviously, if they have some concerns, they can bring it up. But that is the beauty of the terms of service, because it is a one-way contract and you establish the terms of that contract. And what's included in this this terms of service, sort of it discusses sort of the limitation of your liability, the intellectual property rights within the website, the country of governance, clauses regarding changes to the terms of service, like it can happen anytime, and it's up to the consumer to check to see if there has been any changes, and much more. And if you are e-commerce, then you will need to include clauses about returns and refunds processing, pricing, and etc. that deal with your business needs. Something else to also be mindful of within your website and social media is, yes.
Just to let you know, you have about 2 minutes.
Okay, so this is the last element. One thing you should also be mindful of is CASL, Canada's anti-spam legislation, right? So if you're going to send commercial electronic messages, you have to make sure that you have the consent of the consumer, the individual, to receive these, to send these messages, and you should have put in place a mechanism where individuals can easily opt out from receiving these messages. CASL is important legislation to be mindful of. You should for sure get consultation if you are uncertain about something, because the penalties are high and you don't want to pay the penalties, especially if you're a small company, because that can sort of really hurt the foundation of your business. So with that said, I think we went through a lot. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so then we can go back to the whole full Zoom meeting.
Wow, thank you.